Welcome to Headlines and Beyond for week 51.1, 2014. And we're trying to keep on track with our headlines and beyond with our editions. This edition, we're going to take a look more. We'll continue looking at the evolving situation in geopolitics. We're going to take a look at the left-right alliances and the left-right issues, and to see how things end up where they are. This is, as I said before, this is not an easy bit of news. It's not your standard sit back on the couch and watch TV news type of things like on CNN. This is something more in depth. You may have to do some research on this. I encourage you to do your own research on this. And you're not watching. I'm not an anchor person. I'm not here reading the news off a teleprompter that somebody else put together. This is the raw research notes that I have that I've put together, and this is my analysis. So it's from these research notes. And what we're trying to do here is we're trying to get through a lot of the propaganda, a lot of the PR that you see in the mainstream media. But at the same time, as you go out to alternative media, there's a lot of hype out there as well. There's a lot of, back and forth. There's a lot of views that you need to sort of think about before you go ahead and say, well, yes or no on it. And so the thing is that you can also, if you look at things properly, you can change the world of journalism. So this is what this is our fight here. This is the fight we have. The chosen avenue, rather than picking up arms, and doing the jihadist type of thing. This is the way we fight for freedom. This is the way we fight for democracy, and this is the way we fight for individual belief. As a Christian, my sort of the real Christian fundamental, we believe in free will, and everything else, your freedom of choice, your freedom of religion, your freedom of speech, all of that stems from free will. Without free will, you don't have any of that. Most of it's arbitrary, and this is what happens with socialism. Socialism has an arbitrary existence. It has a conceptual existence, and more often than not, left and right on the socialist spectrum. Doesn't matter where you sit. What you end up having is a totalitarian state where you initially have the rhetoric of freedom, but at the end of the day, you end up with a dictatorship. You end up with a king above you, and you end up being slaves to the system. And so this is what we're going to look at. We're going to look at how Ferguson, Abu Ghraib, and the infamous Stanford University are all related, how we have police abuse in society. We're going to continue on in our second half, looking at the psychology of evil. Particularly, our focus is going to be on rape and war and sex slaves. Again, we were talking about here, because in all these situations here, we're talking about morality. That morality does matter, and its theological base does matter as well. So let's get into this week's edition. One of the big headlines that have been sort of splashed across the news is that the issue in Pakistan, where Taliban militants have gone in and seized a school, and so far they have more than 100 students have been killed. 122 others have been injured in this sort of Taliban operation here. Now, Pakistan has sort of had this sort of is a bizarre existence. It had used the Taliban in Islam to sort of create itself. If you look at the history of the emergence of Pakistan, Pakistan was actually simply a province of India. It underwent a violent jihadist years ago, and it expelled most of the Hindus in the region. And in addition, if you know your history properly, if you've gone and done your research on history, you know that there were Christians in there. As a matter of fact, this is where it was in Pakistan, in that region there. That's where you had a lot of the Apostle Thomas was in that area. That's the Apostolic Church. People don't know this, but one of the Apostolic churches, the Apostolic Church of St. Thomas, was in India. It wasn't North America. I mean, this whole view, it wasn't Western European. This whole view of Christianity being Western European is a myth. It's a lie. It's a propaganda produced by the papacy and that lie began around 1000 AD, and they've been working on it ever since. And the thing is that what you end up seeing here is you see this goes back to the school siege in Russia, where you have the Chechens go in and seize a school, and they ended up murdering a whole group of students in there, and they also, because there were older girls in there, they ended up raping the older girls. I mean, the whole jihadist narrative of rape and brutality as their holy war. It's a model that's repeated over and over and over again. It doesn't matter whether it's ISIS or whatever. It's repeated over and over again. You know, so in other words, this is a standard MO, a standard modus operandi. This is the way they operate. It doesn't matter whether it's in Syria. It doesn't matter whether it's in Pakistan. It doesn't matter whether it was in Indonesia. You're talking about the Bali bombings, the bombings at the discotheques, and the way the way they came into power and violence. Everywhere that the Muslims have come into power, they've come in through violent jihad. So a lot of the so-called moderate Muslims only exist as the facade for the more violent, more radical jihadists. So as soon as the sort of the vanguard, the smiling vanguard of the totalitarian Muslims come in, that's when your warning signals that the violence is not far behind. And most Muslims communities can attest to this. When you have, particularly in India, you're seeing honor killings on a daily basis. I mean, right now on a daily basis, you have honor killings in the Muslim community, and this is something that should be troubling a lot of people here. But of course, you know, you have a variety of different groups, particularly in the United States, having this view that, well, you really can't be racially profiling people because, you know, you shouldn't be doing that, even though that, you know, in some cases you do have to racial profile, and if there's a particular issue with a particular race. But this is not necessarily a racial issue with Islam. This is an Islam issue. And the unfortunate thing is that one of the people who got upset by the new profiling guidelines set up by Obama on December 8th is that the guidelines, the new guidelines for racial profiling, kind of completely missed the market. And this is you're trying to teach Americans who are not, even if they're Democrats, they're not really on the ball when it comes to the rest of the world. And they won't notice the difference between a Sikh and a Muslim. They won't notice the difference between a Hindu, a Muslim, and a Christian. They have no idea that there is a beyond black and white. Right now, the American narrative is black and white. All the other colors in between kind of just get washed into a standard pot, and everybody is the same. It's kind of like when they talk about Asian people. I can't really tell them apart. I mean, if you know them well enough, you're living in the community, you can tell people apart. They have different facial features, they have different ears, they have different hands, they have different eye structure. There are commonality. There's a commonality there, but at the same time is that there are distinct facial features, and you can tell people apart once you get to know the environment. But if you don't know the environment, if you don't know and haven't lived in that environment for a long period of time, or for any period of time, as a matter of fact, then things are going to seem too strange to you. And the thing is that we think the more we try to be in North America, in the Western world, we try to be an open society. We try to be more lenient, more tolerant. We talk about being tolerant here, and what we ended up seeing here in Australia. This is recently in Australia, in Sydney, Australia. Here, because it was I think it was yesterday. It was December 16th, and today is the that I'm recording this on. This is when the show is being taped. Oh yeah, December 16th. So this is for earlier today. Report: 3 dead, 4 injured after police storm a Lynn Cafe and brought a day-long standoff at Sydney. So what happens is that a gunman goes into a Lynn Cafe and takes a whole group of people hostage. There's a 16-hour period of a standoff and negotiation, everything trying to bring the thing to a peaceful close. They get most of the people out, except for very few, except for 7. There's a shootout, and well, the lawyer comes out and says, "Well, this is a one-off nutter." And what's he talking about? Well, because what happens is the guy who ends up being the gunman is a Muslim, a radical Muslim. He was actually out on bail for violent crimes. In other words, at the time he committed this, he was out on bail for other violent crimes as well. And if you look at what his whole thing is, and this is a very telling thing here. If you go into the details, and I had to go into 3 or 4 different papers to get all the details here. He's got sexual assault charges against him. He's moved from the and this is the this is the telling part here. He's moved from the what they call the Shia Islam or Shia Muslim, which believes in saints. So they believe in a lot of things. They're actually, and they're not necessarily as violent as the Sunnis are. The Sunnis have a completely different view of things. The Sunni Muslims believe that they are the Muslims, and more often than not, it's the Sunni Muslims who will go in and attack other Muslims for not believing the way they do. As a matter of fact, there's a term that they have called Rafidi, right? And these are they call the Shiites, and these are the Shia Muslims to be heretics, to be rejectionists, to be Rafidi of true Islam. So in other words, it's the Sunnis who believe it's their job to go in and correct this by force and actually initiating a jihad on this. So this is what's going on in here. You know, this is the guy that's there, but the lawyer comes out and says, "Oh no, that we can't connect him to terrorism. He's a one-off nutter." But the problem is, if you look at the history of this situation here, this is actually what you see here. You see these one-off nutters. I mean, the people who are the Sunni, the jihadists, they're not mentally balanced people here. I mean, no one in their right mind could believe what they believe, that God is telling them to go out and kill people and to rape people, and this is part of God's plan. This is what God wants you to do. I mean, this is you know, from in many ways from a fundamental Christian point of view, from my Christian point of view, and that's the fundamental part. It's complete insanity. I mean, how does God tell you to go and kill somebody? How does God go and tell you to rape somebody? I mean, this is not something that is considered to be a moral behavior. And this is the fun. You don't even have to go to Christianity to see this. Even if you look at the more conservative Hindus in India, they consider rape to be very abhorrent and to be morally evil. So to have your God be a pimp and give you 42 virgins to say that these things are good and to tell you to do these things, and this is something that seems way off, and so it wasn't surprising that you see later on later on in the day, you have in the news wire coming up that 1,500 people marched in Dresden, Germany. There was an anti-Islamization rally in Dresden, Germany today. And then you can see this. You can see that this whole concept of the spread of Islam being frightening, being viewed as a threatening thing. But the bizarre thing is, and this is where the sort of the twist of it, the dramatic irony comes in, if you will, or the irony of the situation, is that the EU, Germany, has been doing the exact same thing since the 1800s. It's been spreading its Germanicness. They've been making most of Europe Germany. This is what the papacy did. This is what what Napoleon did. This is what the Nazis did, and they're still doing it today. The whole issue in Ukraine is about making the Slavic part of Eastern Europe to be German, and this is what it's all about. This is why you have Euromaidan. I mean, and so what happens is that you have the Europeans being threatened by the Muslims who are not basically white. Anyways, when we come back on the other side, we will continue talking about this, and see you then.
iNN, uncut, unedited, and real. We deal with issues that other networks won't.
Welcome back. Just took a bit of a break and fixed some things up. Anyways, we're talking about the irony of the anti-Islamization rally in Dresden, Germany, where you had about 15,000 people marching. What they were basically doing is they were protesting against the asylum seekers. They call them asylum cheats. You were having, but this is in with the refugees from North Africa, from Syria, and so on and so forth. You're getting in a lot of jihadists in there. They know that the jihadists are sneaking across the border in these asylum seekers. And of course, you know, the EU, these European folks are upset about this. The problem with this is that if you look at the history of Germanification, that there's a long history of Germanification. They've gone not only into the East and the Slavic parts, but they've gone into Egypt. They've gone into Syria. They've gone into the North Africa. I mean, all you have to do is look at what the UN and the EU did within Libya to understand that they're creating a large chunk of the problem. And then once the problem starts flowing across the board because it doesn't stay put where it is, and this is the whole issue with American illegal immigration. Well, if you don't want these illegal immigrants coming across the border from South America, stop overthrowing the governments down below in South America. I mean, the only reason why people are coming across the border from South America is because the United States and Europe continuously overthrows the governments so they can have a plantation. I mean, people don't seem to understand that a large chunk of Europe's farming produce comes from South America, and these are coming from plantations. That Europe still has plantations, and they still have slaves on these plantations. I mean, Europe has never fully left the plantation environment. As much as they may talk about tolerance and racial equality, the reality is the slavery still exists. They still are slave owners. And the equality is basically only on a very token level. It's not really about equality at all. And so what happens is you have the UN urges the EU to take in refugees despite the anti-migrant protests. And the thing is that who created the crisis? It wasn't that this crisis in Syria or Tunisia, North Africa, or in Egypt. They didn't create these crises. A lot of these groups have been funded by the United States. They've been funded by Israel. They've been funded by the UN itself. I mean, they have the fingerprints showing Western European and American and Israeli interests in these situations have been identified. But here they're talking, oh, we're innocent of the problem. And this looking at the Ukraine will tell you how much in denial they are about what the EU is actually doing. The EU, which is basically Germany, you have in the reports in October. Go back to the reports in October. All right, mysterious sub off Swedish coast, off the Swedish coast. Right, Sweden is prepared to use force to force it to serve it. They were convinced that it was a Russian sub. Well, it was later identified near the end of the month as a Dutch submarine, not a Russian submarine. And who ended up helping them to find what the submarine was? It was the Russians helping them out. But this does not the headlines that sort of ratcheted up this environment of war inside Ukraine and the aggression in Ukraine was done by the European Union. It was done by Europe. It was done by the United States. And you have here, right, the Pentagon press secretary talking to one of the talking to a reporter from the Associated Press, and he says, well, yes, NATO has expanded eastwards towards Russia because NATO has been complaining how Russia has been putting troops on its borders, and that they don't understand why. And the thing is, he's blaming Russia for reacting to NATO's expansion into the eastern part of the world. He expects that Russia should take this properly, that the United States is the leader of the world, and that whatever the United States says must go. But and the thing is, this is the whole thing is here is that he doesn't seem to understand, right? That if Russia was expanding into American territories, right, into the American backyard, do you think that the United States would sit there and say, "Oh, yeah, Russia's our leader. We're not going to challenge them"? No, this is exactly how superpowers behave. As soon as one group starts nudging up its military, you're going to have another group, the opposite group, nudging up its military. In other words, you're going to create moving your militaries into areas that were supposed to be demilitarized. You're going to create a problem because you're going to start destabilizing the situation. If a situation was stable on either side of the demilitarized zone, then there's no problem. But as soon as you start moving, as soon as one group starts moving its military hardware into the demilitarized zone, into the neutral zone, then you're going to start having problems. And this is exactly what NATO has been doing. NATO has been slow but surely expanding eastward, absorbing a lot of the Slavic countries, a lot of the Slavic nations. And the thing is, they're doing so in the exact same manner that Hitler had done during Operation Barbarossa. And why are they expanding into the Slavic area here? Well, people don't necessarily understand this, but this is where oil is. There's oil there. And this is why what you saw what happened in Yugoslavia. This was the reason for Bosnia. This is the reason for Kosovo. All these Eastern European moves. One was because you had interest by Germany to Germanify Eastern Europe, to make it more German, and that's what they did to the Poles. Poles were heavily Russian, and what you had is over the centuries, from 800 AD on, is you had a slow Germanification of the Polish. This is exactly what happened in Ukraine. It happened in Greece. You have the Germanification of these people who are not specifically European. And the thing is that it even though NATO has been taking the aggressive steps, has making these aggressive moves, it has claimed that Russia is the aggressor in this case here. And the thing is, what you have in this conversation, right at the end of the conversation, in the same frame, you have this time frame. Poland moves thousands of troops to the border with Ukraine. And the thing is, there wasn't actually anything really there wasn't really any military threat ever shown or produced by NATO. All that's been shown by NATO has been shown to be false. Has been shown to be incorrect photographs. It looks exactly like what we saw during the run-up to the war in Iraq. And so, of course, a lot of people going, well, this is, again, the United States and NATO behaving like tyrants. They're there to overthrow governments. They're there to create these caliphates, these tiny little satellite states who cannot exist by themselves and need the United States, need these Western powers to babysit them. This is what Europe is. Europe is a dictatorship. The EU in Brussels is a dictatorship. They're used to dictating the policies that are going to be happening in Europe, in these tiny different European states. They don't want an independent Europe. They don't want independent people in Europe. They want these tiny little states that need the EU to control them. This is what they want, and this is what's going on in Eastern Europe. But as soon as they start standing up, these guys are bad, we have to overthrow, we need regime change in there, and they go in and start beginning to overthrow these people. And obviously, because there is a connection with Israel here, particularly with the Middle East, but people also start seeing a connection with Israel, you have these people talking about this New World Order and how the Zionist Jews are sort of taking over everything. And it says ISIS has been given a new name. It's called a new nickname. It's called the Israeli Secret Intelligence Service. And the thing is that to some degree this is true. This is sort of what we're saying in terms of the conspiracy theories. This is somewhat true. And I say somewhat true because the conspiracy theories are never monolithic. But yet most people who view and subscribe to conspiracy theories view conspiracy theories as being monolithic. And they're not. But it is standard geopolitics. Is you have a variety of groups who have a mutual interest acting on and working together on areas that they have mutual interest in. And of course, where they have no mutual interest, or they sort of are mutually opposed to each other, then they're at war with each other. So what happens is you have a sort of a very amorphous type of conspiracy, where the conspiracy only exists as far as your own self-interest exists. So you have a political leader, or a leader of a political group. His interest in a particular issue or a particular political event is only goes so far as his own self-interest. And it's not even a national interest. It's interest in that the group has. Because you don't have an entire national interest up there. When you have Obama going into a particular situation, he's not representing the United States. He's representing his own group. There are groups and there are powers behind the presidency. And he's representing these groups. There's a base group, and then there's also some side groups that he needs in order to sort of consolidate his power. You can't simply rely on the base. You have to have a coalition of interest groups in order to become president of the United States or any particular leader. And you have to start satisfying these coalitions. And this is where the Israelis come in, because the Israelis are part of this coalition. And they make sure that this is the way they operate. And this is the way a lot of governments operate. They make sure that they have coalitions and interests with almost every single leader they're out there, no matter if whether they're for or against them. And this is why you can see in certain cases they're working together with Iran, and in some cases they want Iran to be knocked off. I mean, this is what all you have to do is go back to the Iran-Iraq War, go back to Iran-Contra to understand this. And so what happens is when you start looking at this, the entire concept of a Israeli-dominated or an Israeli Zionist Jew conspiracy theory starts to fall apart, because you start to see that there are more components that is not necessarily as black and white, as uniform as you might think it is. Then if you start going into the Israeli media and you look at what's been going on in the Israeli media behind the election scene, and see that you have multiple different opinions of what's going on inside Israel. You don't have a single monolithic view of what's going on inside Israel. You have a whole series of opinions in there. You have your standard left-right arguments, social left and social right, and even to the point where within 1 week, Benjamin Netanyahu has gone from a sure thing to win the March 2015 elections in Israel to a 50-50 deal. What has happened in 1 week since it was a sure thing that Benjamin Netanyahu was going to win the elections, and that's why he called early elections, because he thought he was going to win. The polls were saying, "Oh, he's going to win." What happened? It happened that when he brought up the Jewish nation-state bill, it irked so many people that two groups on the left, who typically hate each other, decided that they hated Benjamin Netanyahu worse in this Jewish nation-state law together. They hated this stuff so much more that they put aside their differences and decided to form a coalition. And so what happens is that you have options inside Israel for peaceful change. You have ways to negotiate things out, because you don't have a single monolithic view in Israel. And this is the thing. For me, the best way of dealing with issues is dealing through negotiation. Negotiate your way out of different situations. Yes, you do, to a certain point, have to have the military. But they're there only as a necessity, only as a last resource. They are not there to go in and formulate change the way Obama's been doing it. And for those of you who are saying, oh, this is all Republican, think again. The neocons exist both on the left, and on the Democrat side, and on the Republican side. There are neocons across the aisle. So it doesn't matter whether you elect a Democrat government or a Republican government, you're going to get neocons in there at some point in time. You're going to have this military presence. You're going to have this military existence. You're going to have this militarization of the United States no matter who you elect. The key issue is you have to stay independent. You have to make sure, as long as the government is small, as long as the government is responsive to the people when they protest, this is the type of government you want. A government that is large, that is overwielded, that is heavy on the bureaucracy, is not going to listen to the people because it doesn't have to. It's big. It's unwieldy. And no amount of protest is going to change this. But for a small government, you can do this. You can change a small government. You can influence a small government with protests. So my choice is obviously Republican, because Republicans typically keep a smaller government. So anyways, when we come back, we're going to get into the psychology of evil. And we're going to look at rape and war and sex slaves and how this ends up playing out within the whole situation, the geopolitical situation. All right, when we come back.
iNN, uncut, unedited, and real. We deal with issues that other networks won't.
All right, welcome back. We're on the other side of our break. And we're getting into the psychology of evil. We're going to get into rape and war and sex slaves. And a lot of this actually goes back, you can go back into Ferguson, because I was looking at more what's going on in Ferguson recently. And there are still issues going on. There are still protests going on around the United States about this whole black-white issue. And this is where you come up and say, you know, the United States really has a problem, because the United States views everything as black and white, as everything, and it views the entire racial situation as this. And it's completely blindsided by the fact that the rest of the world is not black-white. It's the whole range of colors. And this actually pops up with, with the Indian Times. If you look back in October, there was a New York Times cartoon showing the Americans being these in this white club where they're sitting reading newspapers and stuff like that, and they're looking over, and there's a knock on the door, and there's a Muslim, Hindu snake charmer, an Indian snake charmer, with his cow knocking on the door, and the title on the door says Elite Space Club. And if you haven't been watching what's going on in Indian news, you haven't been watching the Indian Times and looking at what's going on there, then you won't know that India is now set to get involved in a lot of these Mars missions. That now India has a satellite around Mars doing Martian exploration, just the way we did explore, just the way we had done early on in American space exploration. Same thing with the European space exploration as well. And the thing is that it was this type of thing here that we see here, that, and this is from the Prime Minister Modi, that America likes to believe that India is still backwards as this sort of cow-loving society, like that's like the snake charmers, but it's not. It's actually it's a whole different society now. There is the country society, in just the way the United States has its Ozarks, it has the hillbillies. Well, India has its fair share of people as well. If you want to look at it by proportion, the United States has 300 million people. India has 1.5 billion people. So do a comparison there in terms of the size of the problems, in terms of the size of the specifics, the ratios in the society, and you get an idea of where India now sits in comparison to the United States, as compared to, let's say, Washington D.C. In comparison to the Ozarks. And the Ozarks are where your hillbillies are, and you'll see there's a world of difference in there. And the thing is that You also have this week, and this sort of, this is sort of where you get this from. You have a complete lack of understanding in the North American media, the mainstream media, of what's actually going on in the world. It's presented from, and this is somewhat to some degree understandable. We always see things from our perspective, but the thing is that when we start going off and saying something is global and assuming that we are intellectual, right? Saying that these are these professors who are saying that they know the world, that they have these degrees, they have this knowledge, and that all of a sudden that they should be listened to because they are the experts, they are intellectually based. When you look and see what's actually going on in the world, you realize that these people, these academics, are completely ignorant, and a lot of the advice that the president is giving is completely wrong because it completely misses the point as to what's actually going on in the world. And so instead of having a proper global view of what's going on in the world, you have a very myopic, a very colored view of what's going on in the world, not a real view of what's going on. And this is why I say you have to go in, when you talk about these issues of sex slaves and rape and war, we have to talk about morality. We have to talk about what we believe is right and what we believe is wrong. And it not only about the belief of morality, but to actually show you that there is a observable morality. There is an observable moral standard. And we can see the consequences when these moral standards are lapsed and when they're sort of excused. That the things that we consider to be horrible occur because of this. And this is one of the issues that is very touchy for a lot of people, and this is sex slaves and rape and war. And we're keeping this topic inside of our reports because this stuff doesn't go away. And I'll demonstrate that this stuff does not go away. That simply arguing the left-right using the left-right argument of rights. The right will say, oh, it's an issue of morality, and they want to stamp out prostitution, without understanding that most prostitutes are victims of sexual abuse. They're there because they have no other option. This is what's happened to them. They don't voluntarily, they don't come up and say, I'm going to go and become a prostitute. This is something that has occurred to them, and they have no idea how to get themselves out of it. The left will go back and say, this isn't an issue of morality, this is an issue of rights. The problem is it is an issue of morality, because if you could say this stuff is morally wrong, then you can't abuse women the way they're being abused. The women do not choose these professions openly. They're saying, oh, let's assume you have a lot of different choices of jobs. You have, job A, B, and C, and the D job is prostitution. You say, oh, you know what? I think I'm going to really enjoy prostitution. I'm going to go into that. That's not the case. That's never the case. And the thing is, because this view is on the left that exists, you don't have, and your political situation is primarily a left-right situation. You don't have the ability to say this is wrong, and this is what happens. And this is something we see in India here. I'm using India as an example, because India is our pluralistic society. It's a model pluralistic society because it's existed for so long as a pluralistic society that you can see the end result of where things would go if you did indeed have an entire global civilization that is so-called pluralistic. And the thing is, we saw this this was in the this week's news, and in last week's news, they're talking about the Uber cab driver who raped a young girl in Delhi in December 12th. And then recently there was another case that sort of emerged, and the driver has a whole history of sexual abuse on his record. And the thing is that from 2012 to 2010, and this was actually in the paper, nothing's changed. For the safety of women, nothing has changed. And the women can't necessarily understand why this has happened. And so the leftist groups will come up and say, then it's the right's fault. The rights group will come up and say that it's the left's fault. But they don't understand that both sides are actually wrong. Because why? Because they haven't addressed the moral issue. Prostitutes do not choose to become prostitutes. They are victims. And if you go after the prostitute and say, this is how you stop prostitution because it's wrong, then you're going after and punishing the victim rather than going after and punishing the abuser. If you want to get rid of prostitution, you need to go after the abuser. It's the abuser that pushes prostitution, not the other way around. But yet, this isn't seen. And this is a description, and this is an accurate description of what actually happened. And it's surprising that India does have the reporting rate that it does, because in North American cities and in Western cities, most girls and women have given up on reporting rape, and so the reporting rates of rape are very low in Western Europe, but in India they're very high. But this will give you an example of what actually happens. And this was from a December 16th report. It says they say time flies, but for me, it got stuck 10 years ago. I was a victim waiting for justice, and now I'm just a victim waiting for justice now. In other words, she was waiting for justice back then, and she's still waiting now. In other words, it hasn't happened yet, right? It says, and this happened when she was 13 years old. India has a situation where a lot of poor people, they can't go to school, they can't go to do anything, they have to go and work. So she was a domestic servant. She was a maid, basically, right? And the thing is, a group of men who I guess was in the environment. I think he was one of the sons of a politician. Had a group of friends. They about 6 friends. They took her. They raped her for several hours, and then they left her for dead in the field. They brought them to court, right, and tried for years to get this thing to go to court. But for 8 years, the system stalled. And the thing is that the main person who did this, who has political power, and they say he's been since married. He does have political. He's part of a major political, part of the major political system. He's been having his bodyguards intimidate the victim to prevent them from testifying, so this thing won't go to court. And so he's still around. He's now married with a child, and yet she, the girl, still has to hide, because this is the way things are viewed in India. That these things are viewed as shames for the girls as well. And so what happens is that she's sort of put in this position where she's, as a victim, is victimized by society itself, and every time she has to go into court and recount these things, what happened to her, because this is the way the court works, she feels like she's being raped all over again. And there were several articles in the Indian Times and a lot of these different Indian newspapers. There's the Hindustan Times, there's the NDTV. There's a number of all talking about how when girls are forced to recount their abuse, recount their situation, that they feel like they're back in that situation all over again. That the damage caused to a girl in rape is not primarily physical, it's primarily psychological, it's primarily emotional. That there's significant emotional damage to this. And this, again, is not understand. If you're a socialist and you believe that there is no soul, then how do you believe that the person's emotional damage is actually significant? You don't. And this is why in many cases the left often betrays women, because it says, "Oh yeah, we'll protect you. We'll fight for your rights." But at the end of the day, if the damage isn't properly physical, in other words, if the person's not dead, then there's no particular issue, because the soul doesn't exist, the emotion doesn't exist, and then because that doesn't exist, you can't properly charge the person. And then what happens? The system gets dragged out. By the time the system does get dragged out, if he's given a sentence in court, it's more often than not time served, because the the amount of time you spend in jail awaiting for trial is counted, I think, time and a half. So let's say if you've done, you took 8 years for the verdict to show up, it's viewed as 8 plus 4, right? Time and a half. 8 plus 4 is 12 years. So if you're given given a sentence of 12 years for rape, which you probably want, you're usually given a sentence of 10 years, then you're out with time served. So in other words, the person walks out of jail the day he's convicted. And more often than not, the person's not going to be sitting in jail all that time. He's going to be out on bail. And so what happens is that the system really does let down girls. It really does cause a problem. And the thing is, this is, again, looked at and seen when you look at the Uber cab driver case. The cab driver case, and we'll come back and we'll talk about this a little bit more in the Uber cab driver case, because it's not an isolated incident. Uber has had these problems not only in India but all over the world. So when we come back, Uber cab driver rapes in India and the problems of rape within society.
iNN, uncut, unedited, and real. We deal with issues that other networks won't.
Welcome back, everybody, to the other side of iNN's headlines and beyond. We're looking at the psychology of evil and how things end up working out. And I said left looks at things from a right's perspective, and the right looks at things from the moral perspective, or what they call a moral perspective. But if you look at it carefully, you realize there's a lot of holes in their morality that allow for behaviors that we see. In a cab driver, in this sort of Uber cab driver case, that you had the guy. He had been known to his community, to a lot of people, even including there'd been prior cases brought against him, and still he was an Uber cab driver. In other words, this guy had previously served 7 months in prison for rape, and yet the Uber cab company could not find his arrest record, and so he was viewed as a clean driver when this most recent rape happened. And this is what's sort of pushed. If you're wondering what's going on with the Uber cab company, why they're being dropped in France, why they're being dropped all over the place, is because the Uber cab company has had a lot of problems. And they haven't been properly checking out who their cab drivers are. And so what happens is you can get into a cab with someone who's driving who is a sexual predator. And the thing is, what happens is that the left view of protect your rights does not actually protect you from predators. And this is what we see here in India. And the thing is, not only do you see this in India, but you see this in Sweden, where they're really proud of the fact that they sexualize children from the age of 7 years old and up. And the thing is, the reason why I call Sweden the nation of pedophiles, if you're proud of something, and you say, this is our standard, and that standard of open sexualization results in an increase of sexual slaves, of slaves being directed in your cities or towns' direction, or your nation's direction, then you have a major problem, and you're now, because you're proud of this, you're part of the problem. In Scandinavia and Germany has this particular problem. They have a problem with pedophilia. And the thing is that because their nation allows for brothels to be open legally, you can't have the police going in there and checking to make sure that the women are there on voluntary basis. They're not being forced into the sex trade. In other words, is a prostitute that your service that you're with, are they there because this is what they wanted to do, or are they there because this is the situation that they grew up into? If they're there because this is the situation they grew up into, then you're part of their sexual abuse history. You are a sexual abuser. Doesn't matter if you're a client or whatever it is. Well, I didn't know. you're part of their history. You're part of the sexual abuse history, and that means you're a sexual abuser. There's no other way around it. And this is why I often say that, there are a number of Orthodox, people who call themselves Orthodox. And one of the titles that will be coming up later on will be called The Orthodox Rape Christ. This is the way I had Putin rape Christ. I said Putin rapes Christ. And the reason is because in the Orthodox Christianity is the real fundamental Christians, is the unedited and unaltered form of Christianity that you saw back at the time of Christ. This means you can't kill people, you can't be violent, and there is no excuse for rape. The view, the statement made by Christ as to judgment, as who's going to get into the kingdom of heaven, is that you do to the least, you do to me. This was the statement within the gospel. That means if you're doing to the least, and you have a prostitute there, and you're raping that prostitute, in other words, you're servicing that prostitute, you're using that prostitute. And that prostitute, as I said, is a victim of sexual abuse. You're the abuser. Even though you're the client, you're still the abuser. This is the way the girl is viewing this. Then you're raping Christ. And this, as an Orthodox Christian, if you believe you're a fundamental Christian, you actually believe in the words of Christ, then you cannot be involved, sexually involved, with a person, with a prostitute, because you are abusing that person, whether you know it or not. And the person at the time may seem fine. A lot of the abuse, the way when it happens over a prolonged period of time, the psychology of the abuse victim is to bury the abuse, to bury the effect of the abuse, the mental health issue of the abuse. You bury it under alcohol, you bury it under drugs, and you bury it within your system. You repress it. But it does come out in other ways. It does come out in ways that may not seem logical, because they're not logical, they're emotional. And it becomes part of their mental health background, so that later on in life, when you see them 30, 40 years old, they have significant mental health problems. Well, this is the abuse that's been going on in their life for all this time. And the thing is that if you used this person, you are the abuser. You're part of their abuse past. And again, this is missed. This is missed by the arguments on both the left and the right. The left says it's a human rights issue, and the right says it's a moral issue, and that we have to stamp out prostitution. The way to stamp out prostitution is to go after the prostitute. And that means they leave alone the pimp, they leave alone the customer, and more often than not, the customers are the police, they're the politicians, they're lawyers, they're doctors, they're high out, they're well-off people, and these people are sort of just given a ticket for a misdemeanor, and the bad people, the ones who aren't the victims of sexual abuse, they're the ones who are put in jail. They're the ones who are pushed off into other places. And the thing is that this is something that's wrong. And the thing is, but when you look at what the narrative in geopolitics is, we have the United States and Europe and the Western world going into the Ukraine, going into the Slavic countries, and being the aggressor and turning around and saying that they're not the aggressor, that they are the defenders, that Russia is the aggressor. We see the exact same thing. They went into North Africa. They destabilized all of North Africa. And then said, well, they're not to blame for this. That it was North Africa that was the aggressor. They had Saddam Hussein, they had Gaddafi. They came up with a whole number of different excuses as to why they weren't at fault, even though they are the ones who pushed for regime change. You had the horrors of Bosnia. Europe was at fault, even though Europe armed the separatists and funded the separatists in order to break up Yugoslavia. It was also pushed by NATO. They weren't the blame for all this. And of course, we all know that it was both on the Serbian side, the Bosnian side, and even on the Albanian Kosovo side. All of them were involved in rape and war. All of them were involved in sexual slavery. All of them were involved in sexual abuse. This was part of the war narrative. Even the United States hasn't resolved its issues with rape and war. Matter of fact, they buried it. This is what WikiLeaks is all about. WikiLeaks showed that the United States in Iraq had been repeatedly abusing girls and women in Iraq. Same thing in Afghanistan. But all this stuff has been buried under classified documents. This is what Eric Snowden was doing. This is what the WikiLeaks Julian Assange was doing. And the thing is, you have these particular issues out there that are simply being ignored by both the left and the right, and they're simply sticking to their narratives, oh, morality, and oh, it's human rights. And I think they're both missing the moral point. They're both missing that there are things that are right and wrong. And you can see what happens here. We can observe this, that there is a moral standard. There is an observable moral standard. And that if we want to resolve these problems, that we're going to have to sit down and take a serious look at what these moral standards are. And this is what we're going to do here, because this is part of the news. Part of journalism is trying to figure out what's going on, where the problems are, and how to begin resolving these particular problems. This is journalism. This is geopolitics. This is also foreign diplomacy. This is foreign policy. This is what foreign policy should be. And if this can be in any way, shape, or form an influence to improve the situation in the world, then that's the way it should be. And I think you can't ignore things. You can't bury your head in things. And so as long as these issues are around, these are the issues that we're going to look at. Anyways, my name is Dr. Daniel Karras. I thank you for sticking with me at iNN's Headlines and Beyond. This is the edition, the week 51.1 edition. So we will see you for week 51.2. I think on Friday it should be up and out. Anyways, I will see you then. Alrighty, take it easy and goodbye.
Welcome to the library, and I am the librarian. I am the professor. And professor of what? Professor of physics.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light?
Free speech rules here at Democratic Earth.